the Capitol Police, Metro Police, the Office of Police Complaints, subpoenaed a number of documents and then did other interviews in the field in DC. We anticipate now re-interviewing all of the involved officers prior to issuing findings. So that's what we're scheduling right now. But I still think we're on target for the July 180 day. I don't think we'll get it done before then. And the other aspect is we're doing some video analysis right now, which is just all the publicly sourced video and other video we have access to locate folks. So that's kind of where we are. The deadline is in July, and I anticipate that we'll be close to that deadline when we issue our findings.
Thank you so much. OIG, Lisa, Jen?
Oops, my dog started barking as soon as that happened. Hold on one second.
All right, we'll give that a minute. I can relate to that.
Somebody's having the audacity to walk down our street with the dog, so they're doing their job. So sorry about that. I don't have a lot of updates. We are still hoping to push out our annual report in the next couple weeks for partner feedback. So you should be getting a draft of our documents so you can take a look at it, offer any feedback if necessary. And the Sentinel event first wave report is in draft phase right now. We're getting feedback from the panelists and just trying to tighten it up. So you should be seeing some work product around the first wave of the Sentinel event review panel coming out probably also in the next few weeks. And we're getting ready to start wave 2 analysis and discussions. So that's where the work is at right now. The planning group is going to start identifying wave 3 events for review. I think that's everything that occurs to me right now that I wanted to update you on. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we will go to a monitoring team update and response. Lauren?
Great. Good morning, everyone, again. The monitoring team submitted its plan and methodology, and the CPC provided a number of questions seeking clarification and just sort of more detail. The monitoring team graciously offered to respond in writing, but also to come and have a dialogue about some of the questions that were posed to them. And so this is that meeting. On Monday, we received a written response from the monitoring team that you all should have received. And today the team is going to walk us through their responses and are here to answer any questions that we may have for them. Dr. Ofteli, I believe that you are here.
I am. Hello.
Great. So I'll turn it over to you in terms of, I think it would be helpful to just sort of get a big picture response from you, and then maybe have a more question and answer field dialogue.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with the entire CPC, and I'm glad there's so many people on the line here. It sounds like the weather is phenomenal there, so if you could send some my way, that would be great. Although we'll be out there relatively soon, in a couple of weeks in person, so hopefully you guys can keep this nice weather going. I guess, yeah, I could give some broad overview of how we thought through the questions, and then I think you all have the actual responses in your document there. I guess I would start and reiterate that the monitoring team is looking to collaborate with CPC in new and better ways going forward. I think that the previous monitoring team and the previous members of the CPC, there's been an evolution and change over time, and now is a wonderful point where we all can start to look to the future and start to drive change and innovation day to day, week to week, month to month, in a very collaborative way, starting now. So with that mindset, we want to lean into that. The way the monitoring team looks at this overall process is one of getting to a point in time where we can advise the court, which is our primary objective, on SPD and the city's ability to sustain constitutional policing. And when we look at that from the lens of the accountability, we are looking at the CPC, OPA, and OIG as the 3 accountability partners that look at policy, that recommend policy, that work together to figure out how that policy can be implemented, and then evaluate that over time. And that becomes a learning process, so that the entire ecosystem of accountability organizations are working together in a solid way to get to better outcomes and trust in the community, but also amongst the accountability partners. And that leads to legitimacy over time. That way, when the monitoring team is no longer in place, as those the system holds itself up, those capabilities become embedded in the overall ecosystem, and that we see you as a critical piece to that. So in a broad sense, what we're trying to do with the monitoring plan and the methodology is build towards that. Obviously, we're all looking at policing and what that means to be better relative to Seattle over time. But particularly for this conversation, looking at what it means to also build up those capabilities that I was just talking about. And so we want to make sure that the monitoring plan and the methodology, the measures that support how we look at SPD and accountability represent CPC, they represent all the parties, and that we work with you towards those overall goals. That also means that I think over the coming, particularly this year and leaning into 2022, we want to work with CPC to make sure that you guys have the capabilities, the structure, systems, processes that are needed to be put in place to do that work, the collaborative potential and some of that, those connection points between organizations within the city to make sure that we're all working towards the same objective. So so all that, you know, in the monitoring plan and the methodology is trying to gear towards that. It's not perfect, of course, and we're going to, you know, spend a lot of time working with all of you at the CPC to make sure that we make it even better over time. And particularly as we go into 2022, looking at how do we really position CPC well along with the other accountability partners to, again, to take this over and to have the monitoring team phase out and the federal involvement phase out, and have the accountability partners in Seattle really lifting up and taking that on. So I guess view this as a like a trajectory, a continuum, if you will, to getting better and better over time with this, and that's how we view the monitoring plan and what we're trying to achieve that way. Why don't we, Laurent, if it's okay with you, we can, you know, go through individual questions if you want, or have Monisha if you want to relay a few broad comments as well, and then we can get into details.
I think it would be helpful to hear from Monisha and maybe Christina, and then open it to the commissioners for questions, if that's fine.
Great, thank you. I won't take much more time. I think Antonio did a good job of just explaining that as a monitoring team, we're looking to, and I think we've said this before, but our goal is to support the system in a way that we're no longer needed. To support the system in a way that each of the partners is working with each other, talking to each other, has appropriate feedback loops amongst themselves, so that when the monitoring team has to leave, there's no collapse, that really the system is working at peak performance because the system is put in place to be able to recognize deficiencies and fix itself. And so you'll see that in the way that we approach our role, that particularly around the areas of technical assistance, where we're going to encourage our partners to talk to each other to solve problems, so that will become a second muscle. It will be a memory that you'll be able to easily go back to and saying, how do we fix this, without having to have the monitor be the in-between to that. And so it'll be a little bit of a shift maybe with the relationship that you're accustomed to, but understanding what our end goal is that the monitoring team will not always exist. And towards that end, how do we set up a system that actually doesn't need us to exist? And then I'll pass it off to Christina if there's any additional words.
Sure, thanks. I guess I would just take the opportunity to note that I think that Antonio and Manisha are focusing their comments on sort of the way that the monitoring plan interacts with the CPC, which I can understand since you're the audience they're speaking to. But I would highlight that the monitoring plan is mostly concerned with ensuring that there's continued compliance with the core areas of the consent decree. So the goal is to find ways to make sure that the 6 areas that were mandated by the consent decree are evaluated to see if SPD has continued to be in compliance. So the last time we evaluated them sort of ended in early 2020. And the idea is, how do we know that that has continued to be the case? So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it, and one that may be of particular interest, I think, to the CPC, is concerns around SPD's response to the protests that began in late May of last year. And so we are looking at that through the lens of the consent decree requirements. You know, are there systemic concerns around use of force reporting, supervision, all of these topic areas from the consent decree? We're taking a deep dive into how those relate to the protest response. So those are really the areas where we are looking for compliance with the consent decree. And if there is not compliance, then there will be things that continue to need to happen and change before our work is done here. The rest of the elements of the monitoring plan, things that relate to the accountability partners and improving capabilities there, the other things that the monitoring team has been discussing are more in the way of technical assistance and making sure that the oversight mechanisms that are meant to take over when this process is gone are ready to do that. And I know that you guys have a lot of robust processes in place, and you're either at 21 members or pretty close. So I think that there's definitely interest from the monitoring team and DOJ in terms of the capabilities and the readiness of the accountability partners, but that is much more looking at it from a technical assistance perspective and, how can we be supportive? So I just wanted to emphasize the difference between sort of the compliance look that we're doing and the technical assistance role that we play. And I'm happy to answer any questions too.
Great, thank you, Dr. Aftali and Manisha and Christina. I want to open it up now to the commissioners. Anyone has questions for the monitoring team?
I do. Oh, sorry, I'll defer.
No, go ahead. Austin, please go ahead.
Sure. I'm glad that compliance was brought up because I'm curious, because it seems as if that's the core function of the monitoring team, to ensure compliance with those 6 major areas. The city and SPD have been out of compliance with the accountability portion of the consent decree since 2019, I believe. And I believe that it's been a year since the deadline to offer a plan to fix that compliance. And then the protest response was also brought up. And that's certainly a situation where there are plenty of people in the city who believe that SPD is far outside of compliance on use of force because they experienced it directly. I'm one of those people. So I'm curious if there don't really seem to be mechanisms in place to be very responsive to evaluating community concerns about lack of compliance. And when there is, lack of compliance found, there don't really seem to be mechanisms to bring the city or to urge the city to come back into compliance. So I'm curious what the plan is with that.
Yeah, Austin, thank you for that. I guess I can start, and then my colleagues can chime in as well. First, Austin, thank you for sharing your experience, and I know that oftentimes it feels like things just don't move fast enough. when it comes to fixing things, and so that's always a concern. I guess the way I would view that in the plan to address that is what the monitoring team is doing, as Christina had mentioned, is looking at accountability primarily from the lens of what's in the consent decree. And from that, though, we'll be able to compare across previous years, look into, as we mentioned last year, and outcomes from that, and start to see patterns. And from that, we're really hoping, and it already has been happening, where the parties within the city start to change policy and practices over time. So for example, when you look at SPD, even though they're not in a perfect state of say crowd management, they've made major enhancements and innovations within that to change the way that they work in the city and their posture out in the field when something may happen. When incidents happen from the protests, Director Meyerberg, who was on the line earlier, has a very rigorous team that looking at each case to figure out what needs to happen around accountability for that. Obviously, things move at the pace they do, but given the volume, they're moving quite quickly. And of course, CPC is here just for that, right? I mean, you're part of an institution here now that is working directly with community to bring up ideas and concerns, to formulate that into potential policy change that then moves into the overall partnership and the other parties to look at that policy and figure out how to actually implement it, and then to evaluate it. And so that cycle, I think, is what we're really trying to build, to measure and build well in addition. So this, with the monitoring plan this year, the city provides quarterly reports to the monitoring team and to the court, which documents all of that work towards achieving those outcomes and showing how that's built in to be sustainable over time. And as we move through that, we'll, as you see through the course of this year, that'll be documented more and more, so that at the end of the year report, we'll be able to say, here's how all of that has been addressed. Here's the changes being made, the pace of those changes being made. Here's what it looks like in coming years. And here's how all the parties within that accountability system are working together to do that work. So, so all that is ongoing. It's sometimes it feels like it's hard to see, but I think as the months and weeks go by, and as we continue to work on this with CPC and the partners, you'll see more of this manifest, on paper and visually to reach those goals you're talking about. Monisha or Christina, additions to that?
I'll just quickly kind of reiterate the one point that everything that you spoke about, Austin, is supposed to be within the purview of, OIG, OPA, and CPC. We're looking at the accountability partners to say, how are you responding to this moment? How are you, the evaluations, the findings, and ultimately the responses and the actions that come from that. And if there's something that falls through the cracks, our role is to then find out where it fell through the cracks and work with that partner in order to shore that up. So that's essentially our role. And I reiterate with Antonio that CPC is the appropriate place to bring those public and community concerns to be a part of the system. And so you are working within one of the key accountability partners, and there's a lot of power there in order to influence the changes that need to happen.
So at the risk of beating a dead horse, I'll just attempt to answer as well. I want to just be clear that yes, each of the accountability partners has a role in the issues that you've raised. So obviously individual acts of police misconduct or excessive use of force are investigated by OPA. The OIG looks at systemic issues, and that's part of this Sentinel event review that they're conducting around the protests. And the CPC, as you know, is engaged in dialogue with the community about their concerns. So all of those exist independent of our process and will continue to exist when we are gone. We also have an independent role Not so much in the evaluation of independent events, individual events of, for instance, excessive force, which it sounds like is maybe what you were concerned about particularly. But we are looking at things systemically. So our evaluation of the protest response will be to see if there are systemic issues with things like excessive use of force or related issues, supervision, the early intervention system, things like that. And if there are problems there, then we will be involved in making recommendations about solutions. So we continue to be here and to play a separate role from the 3 accountability partners. And we will just have to wait and see. Our process is probably the slowest of the 3. So the monitoring plan sets out a pretty rigorous and scientific way, I think, of looking at some of these issues. And what you're seeing is the methodology that will guide those reviews. And then, by basically the end of the year, we'll have our results from looking at it. And that will dictate whether or not, or what we do in response. So hopefully that's a helpful third way of rephrasing the answer, Austin. Please let us know if you have more questions.
Great, thank you. Reverend Walden, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate what Austin said, because Austin was also talking about the accountability part of the consent decree that the judge said it was out of compliance, and I don't think I heard a sufficient answer exact how, because that piece was supposed to be worked with the mayor, the city, and the accountability partners to come up with the plan forward. And so it looks like it's being bifurcated, and that's okay if it is, but I think it needs to be clearly articulated because the judge did add that as part of the accountability of being out of compliance. So it was not a finding. So what we're talking about today are the findings that was part of the consent decree and those things. So it seems like it's been bifurcated, and I think it should be stated that it's maybe going to be 2 parallel tracks. And one of them is by what happened this summer, because on May 24th, the city had already filed to come from under the sustainment plan. And we had objected to that because of what was still out there with the accountability system, that part that was still out of compliance, that the judge agreed with us, said it was out of compliance. So if we're going to separate it, then I think we should say that and be clearly so the commissioners, because Austin did ask that question, and then he brought in the fact about what happened this summer. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's and I think I'm trying to understand a little bit of the question, and Austin, maybe you can help me out as well. But the events that happened, especially particularly during last year. Say, Austin, I don't know the particular circumstance of your experience with SPD, but I'll say that provided that that was in 2020, sounds like. There's a couple perspectives. I wouldn't call it bifurcated, but I would say that there are a number of parties that are actively working on this, and the monitoring team is working collectively with them. So with, say, one person's experience, Austin, what the court has said is that almost from a long term, there needs to be policy changes to prevent something like that happening, right? So if there was an incident where policing was unconstitutional, there was excessive use of force, given the circumstances, the policy changes over time need to be put in place to prevent that from happening again, or to severely limit that from happening again. And the OPA will look at those individual incidents with a view from the lens of individual officer or officers.
Sorry, just to jump in, just to help clarify. Sure. And build on what Reverend Walden was saying. I did have 2 sort of separate things that I was talking about. I think that's the bifurcation. You've got the excessive use of force, and I get that that's an individual thing, and we have accountability systems in place to respond to that. If we're talking systemically, which is more your purview, we have a situation where the city is at SPD are out of compliance when it comes to accountability. And they missed the deadline for filing a plan to get back into compliance. And they missed that, if I remember it correctly, about a year ago. And so that seems like a situation where the monitoring team does have a more direct role to play in ensuring that when the police are out of accountability on a key element of the consent decree, that something is done. And I think what I've heard from the answers is that what would be done would be a report that we would get that would sort of delve into the ways that they are out of compliance and the ways that they are not. So if that's what I'm understanding, then that's what I'm understanding. And if that's the role that the monitoring team plays when somebody is out of compliance, that they just sort of continue to monitor, then that's good to know. But that's my main question is, we have a key area where the city is out of compliance, and very little has happened after that. So that's my question. What's happening?
Yeah, and in the monitor plan, when you do that as well, so one of the main things we'll be working on, so we will have a year-end report which documents all of this, but even going back to last year and now is a process across multiple dimensions to redesign, say, for example, crowd management policy. Right, so SPD is working on that. CPC has worked on that. OIG has their Sentinel event review, which the monitoring team is involved in, and CPC is involved in as well. All that coming together to redesign something like crowd management policy, then to have a new policy that will go to the court, and the court will look at that, and DOJ will evaluate that for ongoing sustainability. So that process is ongoing to redesign that. I think there is a need right now to kind of harmonize those, right? City Council has their versions of how to change things. CPC has policy revisions that they would like to see put in place. SPD has their own. OIG will be coming in continuously with changes and via the Sentinel event review, and findings from OPA that boil up as well. So one of the big things we all need to work on is taking all of those inputs and figuring out how do we work together as quickly as possible as well, but effectively and efficiently to harmonize those, to find common agreement, and to put those into policy that actually sticks over time. And that's something that I really want all of us, as I'm talking to all of you at CPC, to work on together to make sure we can align those. I'll defer to Christina a little bit on the legalities of the timelines for the city on the compliance relative to that, though.
So I just want to make something clear in case we've conflated them. The areas that I'm talking about that relate to compliance were those 6 subject areas that we identify as being the substantive requirements of the consent decree. And Austin, I know you were saying you get what we're saying about that, but just to be clear, if there's something that's not in compliance there, I don't think it's quite as small as just reducing something to a report. I mean, that has legal significance. It means that if we find them out of compliance in one of those 6 areas, then the consent decree and the Department of Justice and the court and the monitoring team all stick around and work with SPD to come back into compliance. And that's a big deal. So there would be a significant issue if we find that they're out of compliance in one of those 6 areas.
But now, they are, aren't they? I'm sorry to interrupt, but they're out of compliance and accountability, aren't they? That's my whole question.
No, that's a great point. So that's what I wanted to make clear. So those 6 areas, accountability is not one of those. So when we say accountability and that SPD has fallen out of compliance with accountability, the judge was referring, I mean, that term can mean lots of different things, but in the judge's finding, it related really to the disciplinary system with respect to the city of Seattle and how officers are reviewed for discipline. And he raised 5 concerns around the disciplinary system the subpoena authority of OPA and OIG, the timelines for investigation, the use of arbitrators. Those were all the concerns, a couple others that the judge raised around accountability, which is really meaning discipline. Now, DOJ took a different viewpoint with the court. We actually don't think those things were covered by the consent decree, but Reverend Walden and yourself and others who have raised it, you are right that the judge did make that finding, and that has not yet been addressed. Now, I think that what we are recognizing and what the monitoring team is attempting to work with are the limits of our ability to change some of those things because they are subject to collective bargaining and to state legislation. So there have been efforts that I'm sure you're aware of, and I know CPC has been involved in some of them, to change some of those rules. So for instance, one of the recently passed state laws relates to the selection of arbitrators. So that's one of the ways that some of those issues can change, but there are not things that the monitoring team, DOJ, or even the court can change with respect to things that need to be collectively bargained. So some of those issues, some of those concerns that the judge raised are a little bit of a wait and see. We have to see what the state legislature is able to accomplish, what changes in the collective bargaining happen. And I think what we're running up against and what your concern is, we're not able to build some of those things into the monitoring plan because we're not able to mandate changes in those areas. So what it calls for right now is for us to be briefed on those issues and to make sure that everyone is aware of what is happening. But it is not the kind of thing where we can create a mandate around what needs to happen in collective bargaining. It's beyond the powers of the consent decree.
Great. Thank you so much, Reverend Walden and Austin, for raising the question, and for Dr. Oftelli and Christina for helping us get a more fulsome understanding. I'm certain that we will continue this dialogue around this issue in a number of ways as we move forward. I see that Suzette has her hand up.
Yes. So in regards to the compliance piece, I understand what you're saying in regards to part of it being subjected to bargaining. My question is then this: is there anything that's going to be written into the monitoring plan, which then would say to track what is going on and put in other provisions to, if something was not put into the collective bargaining agreement, that you would be monitoring those aspects of it? Because despite the fact that it would have to be subject to bargaining, I would think that you could still write something in there as a safeguard to the monitoring plan.
Thank you, Suzette. Not sure I fully understand, but I think what we are tracking right now is from the city is status of accountability relative to discipline, and with a background of that being around arbitration, right? And some of those issues with collective bargaining. As Christina had mentioned, the monitoring team does not have any direct ability to change collective bargaining, although we can document changes that need to be made, or that should be made, or that the community views should be made, and make the case for that. I guess is maybe how I would say that. As well as I think we can work with CPC to, and I might be a little bit out of my lane here by saying this, but to put some movement towards refining collective bargaining and changing it and get some momentum going on that. That's something that I think that we should all have a focus on, to try and really put pressure on the system to make sure that that's working for community members. But Suzette, I'm not quite sure if I fully understood the question though. Did my answer help?
I mean, that helps, but I think that what everybody's concern would be then is how to address what the concerns of the federal judge, right? Because in one aspect, he's saying that there's an issue, but then on another aspect, you guys are saying that there isn't an issue. So that it's a contradiction in regards to the views. So how do we address that, you know, to make sure that what the concerns that the CPC, the community, and what the federal judge saw is being addressed?
Yeah, so one way to answer that again, I guess, too, is that the monitoring team acts as an advisor to the court around compliance and around sustaining that compliance and around when in collaboration with the city and DOJ, the consent decree would end. As we monitor those activities around discipline that relate to things like collective bargaining, you know, there is going to be a list, right, through this year of things that need to change. And those will be, yeah, the court will be asking about them, but the monitoring team will also answer the court on that. Say, here's where the sticking points are. Then the court will take that, and there's different mechanisms, and I'm going to defer to you, Christina, as well on this. That looking into month by month into next year as to pushing that system in a different way. Let me stop there. Maybe Christina, you can help a little bit more on the schematics of that.
Yeah, Suzette, I mean, I think, you know, you guys are hitting on a really probably the most difficult issue of the consent decree. And that's in part, you called it a contradiction. I would call it a conflict, right? I mean, we have been historically in conflict with the court in the viewpoint of how this issue, in particular, the use of arbitrators and the rule around arbitration in the discipline system relate to the consent decree. DOJ's historic position has been, you know, it's not written into the consent decree. It's not one of the provisions we're here to enforce. And one of the reasons that that's the case is because it directly implicates collective bargaining, which is an area that we respect and don't try to override. And so I think this is really a thorny, difficult issue in terms of how to address the court's concerns, given the limitations of the document and our legal role here. So I think what Antonio is getting at is, you know, we're going to have to be tracking what's happening in collective bargaining and what's happening with respect to statewide legislation and briefing the court on those issues. And for now, that's sort of all that can be done in that realm.
I just wanted to add, at the risk of being too plainly spoken here, so we don't have the power to change a negotiated labor contract. CPC has pushed to have a voice at the table in the next round of negotiations, and in an opinion of one, that is the right avenue, right? It's been recognized that there's a problem there. CPC has pushed city government and city leaders to have more of a seat at the table when it comes to that. That is the right role, and city council will have to analyze that contract before ratification, given everything that the judge put on the table in terms of compliance. We can't dictate what the terms of that contract should be. The terms of that contract are still negotiated between the mayor's office and you know, and the labor partners. And we can tell you when what they have negotiated doesn't meet the needs of the consent decree, which is what the judge clearly said in that case. So given the judge's ruling, the next round of negotiations has to keep all of those things in mind. Given the CPC's position, the CPC has pushed to have a stronger voice at the table. We encourage you to continue doing that. And the safety net is the ratification or lack of ratification by city council when that contract comes out.
And so sorry, Lisa, I think I'm jumping the order here with the hands up, but I just wanted to take one more crack at answering Suzette's question more directly. If you look at pages 7 and 8 of the monitoring plan for this year, which we can recirculate if that's helpful, it talks about sort of what the plan is with respect to this officer discipline issue and sort of what the limits of our role are. But Suzette asked, is there a way of sort of at least tracking that or having a plan for tracking that or addressing it? And there is that built into the monitoring plan. So it says that there will be quarterly updates to the court on this issue, the status of activities pertaining to the system of officer discipline. And the updates are going to include de-identified quantitative data with respect to officer discipline, including a breakdown of the numbers of investigations pending, completed, dispositions, adjudications by the chief's office, and whether the SPD adjudication was appealed and the status or result of the appeal or arbitration. So these issues that have come up in the past that have raised the concerns of the community and the court are, yes, they are at least going to be tracked and reported on as part of the monitoring plan. And I hope that answers your question a little more directly, Suzette.
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you everyone for that. Commissioners, is there anyone who has a lingering question before I ask Lisa Judge to weigh in with her question? Okay, Lisa?
Yeah, hi. I don't have a question so much as I just wanted to remind folks about work that OIG is doing. In light of the court's order and the concerns around discipline, we added to our work plan an audit of the discipline system, particularly with cases after they hit the chief's desk through the appeal and arbitration process. That work is ongoing and we should have a report probably in June. So I'm hoping that the work we do will add to everyone's collective understanding of what the issues may be. And we'll all have, a fuller idea of what, if anything, needs to be addressed at that time. So I just wanted folks to know that we are actively engaged in work to analyze and assess issues with discipline. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to thank the monitoring team. We are pretty much at our time, and DOJ for coming and really giving us a thoughtful response to the questions that were raised in the letter. And then also here, we look forward to continuing to work with you all around ensuring that the accountability system is functional and that CPC is able to play as active of a role as possible. And one of the aspects of your letter that I found very hopeful is the fact that the monitoring team is very interested in ensuring that CPC's voice and recommendations are as seriously considered by SPD and other folks, and that CPC is incorporated as much as possible moving forward. And now that we are more fully and fulsomely staffed up, we look forward to taking you up on that. Also, the clarification on the 2019 being out of compliance with the accountability requirement was super helpful, and we anticipate continuing to have further discussions on that front. Right now, unless you have any closing statements.
I'm going to cut you off. I'm so sorry. If there are any remaining questions that commissioners had, please forward them to the staff, and we will make sure that those get forwarded on to the monitoring team, because I feel like we would have potentially been able to have a little bit more of a robust conversation. And so if there are any additional questions or comments that you all want us to elevate to the monitoring team, we'll make sure to pass those on and get a response. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Great. No, that's great, Betty. Appreciate that. Monitoring team, if you have any closing remarks, if not, we will move on to our CPC updates.
I just thank you for the time, and we're looking forward to collaborating more.
Great, thank you.
All right. CPC updates. We'll start with the co-chair updates. Many of you will have received your work group or committee assignments yesterday. I am going to review those briefly and give a little bit more detail on what that committee is set up to do. One of the things you might note is the first committee is community engagement. This committee is one of our standing committees per the bylaws. The Co-leads of this are Joseph Saya and Alina Santillan. And noting that we do have a new staff member who is our community engagement director. And so they're going to be working on that development. Commissioners assigned to that include Asha Mohammed, Catherine Seibel, Erica Newman, Tasha Johnson, and Lejea Washington. You'll note that some of those are alternate choices because we do understand that there's a lot of things coming at people right now. The other committee that I'd like to discuss is police practices. This is a committee that we've had previously. For moving forward for the next foreseeable future, the focus of the police practices group will be on demonstration management. The co-leads for this are Austin Field and Patricia Hunter, and Commissioners Lejea Washington and Officer Mark Mullins are also on that committee. And then I also want to highlight our strategic planning committee, which many of you know, we are undergoing a strategic planning process this year. And the commissioners assigned to that work group are Esther Lucero, myself, Lauren Baker, Douglas Wagner, and Reverend Harriet Walden. Lauren, do you want to talk about the other three committees?
Sure. I'll talk first about state legislative agenda. Last year was the first year that we had an active role in advocating for legislation at the statewide level that CPC supported. That committee was me and Colleen Echohawk. Right now, we are going through a debrief session and beginning planning for strategies around next year in terms of identifying priorities and potential allies that we might want to work with. And so later on in the year, we might add more commissioners to that. I believe an email was sent out inviting people who want to be part of the brainstorming to come and, to that meeting, regardless of whether or not you have been actively assigned to that work group. And so we're hoping to have as many commissioners there as possible. Another work group that we have is behavioral health. That work group had initially been identified to focus on officer wellness, but after some discussion and sort of looking back historically at the work that the CPC has done, it was determined that the first focus of that work group really should be around people who are in mental health crises and de-escalation. Over the past years, we've seen a number of people who have been subjected to police violence or had really difficult encounters with law enforcement, including use of deadly force as they were in crises. And so we're looking for ways to ensure that there is the most fulsome input of the community into these policies and practices. Dr. Pinto and Catherine Seibel will be the co-chairs of that. Reverend Walden and Douglas Wagner are also members in that work group. Complaint and appeals is the last work group, and that is a work group that is required by the accountability ordinance, and it will be looking at potential opportunities for ways in which people can appeal outcome or determinations about their complaints. And the co-chairs for that will be Prachi Davi, and Erica Newman and Tasha Johnson will be assigned to that work group. We're in the process right now of finding the best times for these work groups to meet. And so you will be receiving an email, one likely asking you which of 2 or 3 times a recurring meeting might be most amenable to you, and then 2 actually announcing the time of the work group. And although people have been assigned to particular work groups, commissioners are welcome to attend any work group meeting that they want to, knowing that they have to attend the work groups that they've been assigned to. But if they're interested in finding out what's happening in the other work groups, they're totally capable of attending those meetings.
The only thing that we do ask is that, we want to make sure that any time that we will have a quorum of commissioners, that we have noticed it appropriately. So if you are interested in attending other work groups, it's helpful to let the staff know so that they can plan appropriately. The other thing that we wanted to tell you that, if we get to a situation where people are wanting to have, a change or anything, we will review them, but there's a lot of work to do here, and we really need folks, to, lean into the work in the work group that you have been assigned to. Okay, with that, we move to executive director updates. Brandy?
Yeah, thank you, Erin. Thank you, Lauren. Just wanted to give some general updates, and then I want to talk about a few operational updates. We are currently setting up meetings with the different accountability partners to go over questions and revisions to the police accountability recommendation tracker and the accountability ordinance tracker. We're just wanting to make sure that we have robust feedback from everyone and just try to maintain the spirit of partnership and collaboration. Wanted to give an update as well about our annual report. We have put together a draft form that has some edits that we are currently working on, and we hope to have a draft version to you all hopefully at the next CPC meeting. So commissioners have an opportunity to weigh in and give edits and feedbacks of that nature. Being able to talk a lot about the efforts that we were able to make during 2020 in light of the challenges of COVID-19 and just transitions and, fulfilling, trying to fill seats and new staff members and everything. And so we are hoping to have a really unique opportunity to kind of change the annual reports that we've done in the past. This will be a little bit more interactive. And so I'm excited for you all to see the draft version of it, but we have some things that we need to add to it and just do some updates too. Continuing to reach out and support Suzette Dickerson, who's done a wonderful job in representing us at the bargaining table and just making sure that we're providing information from community and from staff and commissioners to, give them the information that they need in that role. And so just want to take an opportunity to thank Suzette for stepping into that position for us again. I don't know if I've ever really done it formally, but I want to thank you, Suzette, for being in that position as our advisor. We appreciate it. Operational updates. I want to introduce that we hired our new community engagement director, Felicia Cross. She will be reaching out and setting up time to connect with a lot of you all and working on developing a community engagement and outreach plan. And just revitalizing the district liaison work that we were doing originally, making sure commissioners are, out in community. Obviously, you have your own organic relationships and partnerships, but us being a little bit more versed in reaching out to partners and stakeholders that we haven't had an opportunity to connect with. And so I'm really excited for you all to have an opportunity to work with her here at the CPC. Some additional updates are, I wanted to let you all know that I had talked to you all about board management software, just to help with the process of documents that we're sending out, how we're making official notices, how we're streaming our meetings, the opportunity to do electronic voting, but just to kind of take us to the next level as far as like structure and organization of how we're managing the board currently as it comes to documentations and things of that nature. And so I wanted to give you an update that all the paperwork, all the privacy issues and concerns and IT process, we have fully walked through that. We're now at a point where a purchase order request has been put in for us to finalize that. And so hopefully very soon you all will be able to see a much improved board management process. Lastly, we have talked to you all, and I've had a lot of individual one-on-ones with new commissioners, kind of welcoming and orienting folks to the commission. And I've, been told that folks are, receiving a lot of emails, and we definitely want to keep you connected, but we want to streamline even that process. And so there's been talks of introducing a newsletter that will be internal and then one that's external facing to partners. And we are currently awaiting setup and approval also from IT on that. And so just hoping that, over the course of the next few months, you all are able to see where there's some operational strides that have been made. Other than that, that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Grant. We also now have new CPC business. Do any commissioners have something that they would like to raise at this time? Okay, well then that takes us, Officer Mullins?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to go back. We were going kind of fast, and I tried to get in on it, but I wasn't able to. We were talking about the committees, and I just wanted to be clear or understand what was going on with one of the committees. So we have dropped officer wellness. Is that what I heard?
We have postponed at this point. We only have a certain number of commissioners, and given
Okay.
that we have so many new ones and we're starting new committees, we felt like we needed to stand these up and then work later in the year to do the other committee. Officer wellness is still something that's very important and something we want to work on, but we have to set these up in an appropriate manner so that they can be successful.
Okay. And not to sound like I'm being defensive or always trying to uh, think about officers before community. Um, I just want to help people understand that uh, officer wellness directly affects the community. If we don't have officer wellness, if we don't have good mentally healthy officers, it's going to reflect on all of us. Just to remind people.
Yeah, thank you for that, Officer Mullins. I think we all agree. And it's also our understanding that SPD has a fulsome officer wellness program too that we hope to support during the transition time before we're able to get our own work group up and running.
Yes, and may I say that I did bring it up with the DOJ when they first met with us, that they needed to look into that unit because it needs some representation by more people
Well,
of
that's a really
different
perfect,
persuasions.
yeah, that's a perfect segue to say that, Mark, I'd be happy to chat with you because one of the things we want to make sure that we do is in any officer wellness work we do that we don't replicate or duplicate, work that's already being done. But if there's an area in there that it's important for there to be input, we'd really like to know. So I will follow up with you and get those points, and then we can bring that into the discussion as we move forward in that work later in this year.
And can I say, if anybody else wants to follow up with me, I am basically not getting enough personal contact with the people that I want to have personal contact with. I want people to ask me questions. I want to ask questions. I want to see how people feel. This meeting doesn't provide that.
Yeah, and I think I get it, Officer Mullins. This meeting is very stilted and formal, especially
especially
on
that
the
it
Zoom
does not.
platform.
That does
But
not.
I think the work groups should provide us with opportunities on multiple fronts. One, an opportunity for commissioners to actually roll up their sleeves and begin to do work, as opposed to just sort of asking questions in this meeting. And two, an opportunity to actually get to know and have discussions with each other about some of these, really difficult, decisions and policy recommendations that we have to make, and then an opportunity to really work collaboratively with communities. So hopefully, Officer Mullins, as our work groups get up and running, you'll find yourself overrun with opportunities to connect with people in the CPC for sure. But thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other items for CPC new business? I want to note that it is 10:14 and we are scheduled on our agenda to go into executive session at 10:15. We are back into the old format, so we are able to put people into breakout rooms. So commissioners, you will be moved by Jesse into breakout rooms. For the members of the public, we are slated to come back from executive session at 10:55. I also at this time want to note that Brandy, for this particular executive session, staff is invited to attend so that they can be put into the breakout room as well. I'd also like to suggest that it may take a couple of minutes for Jesse to get everybody moved into the room. So this is a perfect time for a bio break if you need one. And we will reconvene there in a few minutes. Let's just say 10:20 to give everybody a chance if they need to. So 10:20, but keep an eye out, and Jesse will be moving you over to the breakout rooms now. Thank you.
Perfect. And Aaron, could you just tell me who needs to be there that's not a commissioner?
I will text that to you. How's that?
That sounds perfect.
Perfect. Brandy, would you like to close out the meeting?
Yep, absolutely. I just want to thank everybody for joining and, as always, participating in a very robust conversation. I hope that everybody has a wonderful day and the rest of their week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.